Goobers! Good morning to you guys, afternoon or evening, whenever you're tuning in. As always, I do appreciate it. It's Clearski and I'm back, and we are walking down the Springwater corridor today, and we are on our way to a special location. That's right, kind of a last known location, maybe even a hideout of a former Portland crime boss. That's right, days before people knew of, people like Tony Soprano, for instance, from, the show The Sopranos. Portland had kind of such a figure here, a very prominent crime boss, who in fact later on was the reasoning behind the indictments to actually a former Portland mayor as well. We're gonna go check out his, kind of final location in Portland, his hideout, if you will. Talk a little bit more about James Elkins, Big Jim, known by his friends, a Portland crime boss. You're not going to want to miss this one. Stay tuned. So Big Jim, like I said, known by his friends, came from Arizona in 1930 with his brother Fred from Arizona to help his brother actually in a prostitution ring that his brother was involved in. And Jim had big plans himself when he came to Portland. Jim already spent most of his life as a security guard in Arizona, and he basically always was known to possess narcotics and kind of be known to be involved in illegal activities, a numerous amount of illegal activities, and in the mid 20th century rather. So he came to Portland with big intentions of continuing that, kind of style of life. Him and his brother continued to do their operations here in Portland for many years, and then Jim decided that he was going to kind of take his, criminal empire, if you will, to a new level, and that he was involved with renting and supplying pinball machines throughout Portland. Now, back in those times, the pinball machine wasn't really set up like it is today, where you would go in and just play it for fun with quarters and stuff, and try and beat top score. These were more of the, almost like a Oregon lottery at this point, or any really gamble machine at that, better known in like casinos for, gambling. And Jim was already involved in numerous illegal activities in Arizona, so that when he came to Portland, it was kind of like all brand new stomping grounds for him. And he loved it because at the time there really wasn't much crime bosses, there was, people on the streets doing their thing, but Jim had bigger plans, like I said, with the illegal pinball machines. And the succession of those pinball machines gave him and his brother a ton of money, and it opened up the the money income and the influxure of the money that Jim could basically kind of do what he wanted, just kind of modern day, like I said, if you would think like in the movies, like in in The Sopranos, he had Jim had so much money with these pinball machines that he could basically do what he wanted, and he would just basically pay people off. And he was known to double park places, and if there was any involvement with the police, he would basically just pay them off. And so this went on for a long period of time, and Jim's demeanor and everything was basically, I'm in control. If you don't like it, we'll take care of it. And he was highly respected on the streets, just because of the fact that he had such control. And a lot of the other, you know, people like fellow, you know, gangsters or people in that kind of, you know, territory were, you know, really afraid of him because he had so much pull with the police, which would actually kind of later backfire on him. And in about 1957, the unions up in Seattle were kind of known to be organized, you know, being involved with a lot of organized crimes. They had noticed that, you know, Big Jim basically had control over Portland's politicians, the police, and so recently moving the union to Portland, they approached Big Jim with kind of like a partnership, a three-way deal with the Teamsters in Seattle and the Portland, and they wanted Big Jim to kind of take control and relocate the Memorial Coliseum. Well, they realized that Jim basically couldn't do this and they were going to go a particular different route. Well, Jim had bigger plans for these guys. Big Jim, always being kind of, you know, street smart and aware of what was going on, he realized that the Teamsters Union, the mafia up in basically in Seattle, was going to come and try and run his property. And in 1956, Big Jim basically decided to protect himself and Portland investments, and so he went ahead and met with them, but he placed wiretaps in the apartments that he rented out to the Teamsters, and then allowed Elkins and you know, several union officials and Seattle racketeers to, you know, being caught to admitting to a ton of different crimes, various labor crimes, racketeering, all sorts of crimes. And with these tapes being released now by the FBI and the Oregonian, it triggered a 2-year investigation, with the Senate actually coming to Portland to have a special meeting involving Big Jim, the racketeering, the union, the Teamsters in Seattle, and in fact they sent none other than Robert F. Kennedy to investigate as well. Alright, so we gotta be kind of cautious. Like I said, this is somebody's residence and I want to be, you know, not intrusive on their residence. But if you look right here, right across Powell here, this residence here, directly in front of us, 11834, would have been the last known location that Jim Elkins and his wife lived, right here off of Powell. And it's kind of funny how I was able to get the actual location was from a letter that was actually sent on his behalf. His wife later on released it, and it actually stated it was from John Kennedy himself. And after over, I think it was like 500 indictments served to different individuals involved, Jim Elkins walked away basically scot-free. All charges, all indictments were dropped. So he hightailed it out of Portland quick, and his last known, you know, residency or place of existence was in Arizona. And fast forward years later, the police investigations realized that he still had warrants in Portland at the time, but hightailed it out of Portland quick to kind of start a life in Arizona. But yeah, his time was pretty much up after that. So really interesting how it all kind of went into play. And Jim actually kind of disappeared after all this, and kind of beat some charges, was never physically charged with certain things. He had a couple warrants here and there, but basically his time was up, and so he fled back to Arizona. And years later, there was an article, his obituary, really stating how he was shot in the chest and had been deceased, or was deceased, but there was no actual autopsy. Well, the autopsy that the final report is what I mean to say. There was no final autopsy report stating the actual cause of death. So somebody said, well, maybe he got shot in the chest, maybe he had a heart attack and crashed his car, but apparently he did come to his demise later on in Arizona. So his time was cut short. And yeah, that's just kind of unfortunate, but I'll insert the autopsy newspaper article here, and you guys can kind of see where, you know, they weren't quite sure how his death actually occurred. They weren't sure if he had a heart attack or if he was shot. He may have veered off the road. It was really inconclusive, so kind of crazy, really weird ending to the story. And like I said, I, you know, didn't condone any of his, you know, pinball racketeering or any of his, you know, prostitution and drug rings. But I just found the story really interesting, and just kind of, you know, the mob boss of Portland. Crazy. Anyways, I love you guys very much for always creeping with. Make sure you hit that, you know, red subscribe button. That will dial you into being a creeper. And if you already are, I appreciate you guys as always for tuning in and creeping with. You can also ring that bell. That way when I do creep, you guys will be the first to creep. You can also give it a thumbs up. You can also share this video out, which is way cool. And that's gonna do it from Portland, Oregon. A lot has changed since Jim Elkins ran the streets here. Now it's basically all, you know, the Oregon lottery machines and that kind of gambling. But yeah, kind of just a weird, interesting Portland story. Love you guys. Creeper out for now. Peace.